Carl, thanks for joining me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation about the increase in subscriptions as well as the unfortunate increase in failed payments associated with those subscription consumers. So, are you ready to dig in?
I am really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. All right, so let's put some little context around the conversation. 2 data points that I think are worth noting. In some work that we've done, 81% of US consumers have subscribed to at least one new subscription service over the course of the pandemic. Makes sense. And analysts say that there will be at least 50 million new streaming subscriptions over this year as a result of, well, lots of new streaming services and people wanting to entertain themselves across all connected devices possible. So with those 2 data points, it strikes me that the environment for failed payments is unfortunately larger than ever. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our family is definitely in that category of adding in a couple of new streaming services. The kids may have convinced us to jump into the Disney Plus subscription since the pandemic started, and a YouTube premium account. And that's just the trend that we see across the economy, right? It's interesting. There was a report that came out from ClearSales, the False Declined Industry Report, in early 2020, just before the pandemic started. And at that point, losses due to false declines were projected to reach about $443 billion in 2020 alone, just in the US. So we're talking a massive problem. Of course, we don't have the final numbers for 2020 published out just yet, but early estimates are that we probably broke $600 billion in false declines in 1 year alone. So yeah, it's a massive problem. Obviously, as we know, COVID, the pandemic, has really accelerated e-commerce growth. I don't really think of this so much as a revolution as a rapid acceleration of an evolution that was already taking place. For example, Visa comes out with these projections of how the economy is going to move from brick and mortar into e-commerce every year. And we saw about 5 years, the next 5 years of Visa's projections all take place in 1 year. And we don't see that trend reversing itself either. Yes, the pace of accelerated transition is probably going to slow down a little bit, but that 5 years of activity of switching over to e-commerce is with us to stay, based on all the projections that we've seen. And, look, for many merchants that are out there, the average merchant is seeing around 20%, sometimes higher, of all of their transactions falsely identified as fraud and declined. There are other technical reasons to go in there, a little bit of NSF as well, but by far and away, the vast preponderance of the problem is transactions falsely identified as fraud and being declined. So these are non-trivial percentages and dollars.
That's across all of e-commerce, right? So when you think about false declines, you're right, it is fraud. It can be for lots of other reasons too. Let's talk about the subscription commerce environment, where I think the problem can become, really quite detrimental for both the subscriber, who could lose access to the service, and of course the subscription commerce company that spent a lot of time and probably money courting that subscriber. So, in some of the work that you've done, I mean, you've identified obviously acquisition cost and churn, which this is an element of churn, as being the 2 levers that subscription commerce companies need to manage very tightly. How do they do that based on some of the data that you've seen and some of the experiences you have in serving that segment?
Yeah, exactly. We were merchants first ourselves. We've been merchants at scale, even ran also a third-party administration business where we were either selling to directly or servicing customers across 4 continents, Brazil, the US, Canada, UK, Australia. So we have a lot of data that we've seen on this, and we really understand what it takes in order to build a successful business. Obviously, for most online businesses that are acquiring, subscribers, you're looking at, somewhere in the vicinity of a third of all of your gross margin is going towards sales and marketing. It's certainly, for most businesses, the most significant element on the P&L that they can really try to optimize. And we rarely need to tell or explain to companies, hey, you should really monitor your acquisition costs, or you need to spend more on acquisition costs. This tends to come intuitively, right?
Mhm.
We see that most businesses, especially in early stages, like, how can I throw more mud against the wall? Too few people, unfortunately, are focusing on how do we create sticky walls? How do we get more value out of each dollar that we're spending? And this is where you can create a massive competitive advantage. Yes, if you can find ways to have a more compelling offer, if you've got a really great brand that you can leverage and you can find a way to drive down those acquisition costs, that's very compelling. But you can also drive down acquisition costs as a percentage of your overall revenue if you're increasing lifetime value of each customer that you've brought in. And unfortunately, what we see is, especially in the earlier and mid-stage life cycles of a business, they're not spending enough time and resources to reduce churn, creating those sticky walls, focusing on how can we maximize our lifetime revenue. If we're forced by the market to spend this much to acquire a customer, and we really want to drive that down as a percentage of our overall revenue, well, there's really only two ways you do it. Either you spend less on acquiring customers, which is really tough these days because of the pandemic, especially, and all the activity and the buzz that we're seeing in marketing. It's harder than ever before to get customers' attention and acquire those customers. So really the other side of it is, well, can we find ways to generate more revenue, have less friction, have less churn in our member base? And especially when you think about churn, this is way more valuable to focus on because you've already got this customer on the books.
You've already spent the money. You've already spent the money to get them in. But churn is a function of a lot of things, right? Churn is, I really don't like this as much as I thought I would. So, thanks, but no thanks. And I think, we find in some of our research that, subscribers do test the product or service even beyond the free trial, and there's lots of substitutes, so they bail. But then there's also, what happens when a customer really likes the service but something goes wrong in the payment flow. I mean, that's an unfortunate cause of churn where
and unfortunately, it's the number one driver of churn for most high quality brands. I mean, there are bad actors at every stage of the ecosystem. There's going to be bad actor card holders who are trying to game the system and sign up for something without actually paying for it. There's bad actors on the merchant side and the acquiring side, and on the issuing side, sometimes they're behaving in ways that they really shouldn't be and don't like to advertise what they're doing. But generally speaking, we have people that want to transact with one another. We have companies and we have subscribers. They want to do business together. And we have something that's unfortunately getting in the way and blocking them, friction in the rails.
So how do you solve for that?
So basically, we need to understand what's actually going on with the issuers, right? Ultimately, it's the issuer, the name of the bank on the piece of plastic in your wallet, that decides whether a transaction is approved or declined. The more we can understand what it is that they're actually looking for and what they're trying to identify, the better we can start to manage this problem. Things like choosing where how often you're retrying a transaction. It turns out that if you're retrying declined transactions more frequently, that's actually going to start to affect your upfront approval ratio and bring it down over time, because your reputation as a merchant with the issuers and their technology providers starts to degrade over time. So we have to be really careful with the strategies that we use and how we retry, making sure that data fields are optimized exactly as they should be, gateway flags, things like that. There's a few things that we can do, but we have to do something with it because there's so much revenue tied up in this that we're going to be completely outcompeted, and we're not going to have the margins that we need in our business to be able to reinvest into product market fit, into better quality products, new products, being able to pay dividends to shareholders, things like that.
So Darryl, when you think about the reason for failed payments, so it's I had my card compromised and it got canceled. I need to replace it. So that's one. Mm-hmm. The other is I'm short, and or I've run up against my credit limit, and therefore the timing just didn't work for that particular payment. I'm sure there are others, but of those two, what is the more predominant cause of a failed payment?
What we see in our data is that the more predominant cause of a failed payment, the most predominant cause of failed payments right now, is banks trying to determine where fraud exists and where it doesn't in the ecosystem and getting it wrong. And false declines, transactions that look a little bit sketchy, and the banks are trying to act in their best interests as well as in the best interests of the cardholders, and they end up blocking transactions that they shouldn't be. If a cyber thief or a hacker has a database of stolen credit cards in 2021, they're not going to make physical cards and take them into a retailer, right? They're going to be running them online. So all of the, especially since the advent of EMV, that little chip on our card, all the fraud is moving online. And it's a real problem right now for the issuers and for the networks to really determine where that is. And they're getting it wrong a lot of the time. And the systems that they're running on weren't really built for scale. They weren't built for this rapid acceleration that we've seen of e-commerce. It's putting strain on the system, and it's pointing out all the weaknesses that we see in it. That's not to say that there's not problems with actual NSFs and cards being replaced for fraud and things like that, but there is a significant component of false decline friction in the system.
And why do issuers look at this type of transaction and suspect that it's fraudulent, perhaps more so than other types of online transactions?
Yeah, it's a great question. We look at some of the drivers that go into it, time of day. When transactions are running through in the middle of the night, that's one of the things that issuers will look at, thinking that this is more likelihood to be a fraudulent transaction if it's running through at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. But unfortunately, a lot of subscription providers bulk their transactions in the middle of the night when server load is low. They don't realize that they're potentially artificially driving up their decline rates. We see mismatches of data fields, name and address fields and things like that. They don't exactly match what the issuer is looking for, and that's driving it up. Certain gateway flags can be configured just right. Which merchant account you're using and what merchant category code that you're in has a really big impact on how your transaction is going to be scored. Essentially, every transaction that gets processed online receives a 3-digit risk score by the issuer. And that 3-digit risk score is one of the largest determinants in whether the transaction will be approved or declined. Understanding what goes into that risk score helps you to kind of mitigate it. There's a lot of things we can't control, bank policies, customers clearly over their limit, things like that. But there are plenty of things that we can control if we know what it is the issuers are looking for.
And so what are they looking for? And how do you help?
Well, I think one of the things that has the potential to help is leveraging 3D Secure and getting more data in. 3D Secure is a bit of a contentious topic right now because it's creating a lot of additional liability for the issuers, which they're really not happy about. And it's actually in some cases driving up false declines. But I think ultimately the solution here is to get more data, better data into the rails and work in partnership, get more merchants talking directly with the issuers, create sort of a shared ecosystem between them where they can share data and work together rather than operating in these silos. We all want the same thing, less fraud and less friction. We want merchants and cardholders to be able to transact together when they've decided that they want to do business together, and the rest of the friction should come out. So we need more trust. We need more transparency. In the meantime, just understanding the timing strategies, knowing the difference between, one MCC, merchant category code, versus another, making sure that we have our data fields all cleaned up, that we're using services like Account Updater, which is that's table stakes for any merchant. They should be using that. These can have a massive impact.
But if all of these things are known, Daryl, why isn't it that things have changed? Why is it that we're still dealing with the false declines? If we know that, for example, subscription commerce companies batch transactions at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Why aren't we changing?
Unfortunately, there's two problems here. One, the current set of rails that run through the card ecosystem, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and everything, there's been no meaningful update to those rails since 1987. This is why 3D Secure was so important. Like right now, if an issuer is making a decision on whether or not to approve or decline a transaction, they don't see the IP address, the email address, the device ID fingerprint. There's all these incredibly important pieces of data that are directly relevant to the fraud profile of a transaction that they don't even see. So that's problem number one. They're not getting all the data. They have to make these decisions in a bit of a vacuum. And the second reason is that a lot of them are running on very antiquated technology. These decisions have to be made in split-second SLAs in order to be compliant with Visa and MasterCard standards. They don't have a lot of time to leverage technology like machine learning and AI. It has to be rules-based in order for it to work quickly, and they get it wrong a lot of the time. So not enough data and antiquated systems that are much too rigid. I mean, look, Uganda had EMV in their cards for 13 years before the US ever did.
Wow.
Unfortunately, it just seems like turning the American economy and making changes in these card rails, which are so critical, they're critical infrastructure to our economy. It feels like turning the Titanic, and it's really difficult to get in there and improve these systems in a meaningful way and do it in a way that actually has the desired effect. Like we look at the implementation of 3D Secure with a lot of issuers, it's actually driving up false declines when it should be doing the obvious, because there wasn't enough of an alignment of incentives across all the players in the ecosystem to have this actually work properly. Not enough transparency, not enough trust.
So you're in the decline salvage business. What does that mean, and what tools do you use? Why are you better?
Well, I think one of the reasons why we're better is, first of all, 20 years plus of working in the payments infrastructure, having a lot of conversations, knowing where the pain points are, knowing what dials and levers to pull on. That would be one. Second is, who we're talking to. Talking to all the major players in the ecosystem, and we're receiving a lot of data. Like we have billions of transactions in a proprietary database now that we use machine learning on, so cutting edge technology to better understand the trends. And I think critically, we've earned the trust of a lot of the key players on all sides of the ecosystem to have them sit down at the table and actually talk about what's going on and have them buy into more trust and transparency in the system, which ultimately is going to drive down this problem. And I think when you combine all those factors together, you end up with what we have, which is the best performing solution in the market today for driving down these declines, fixing the NSF problem, fixing the technical declines, but critically, really focusing on that false decline issue and creating more transparency.
What's your model? What's your business model?
Right now, we charge on lift. Everybody that is currently working with our technology was doing something with their declines before. So if they switch to FlexPay, we only charge a small percentage of the net increase that they receive. So we love to say to our customers, if you don't make more money by working with us, then we don't deserve to charge anything. And we also make sure that we monitor for future refunds and chargebacks and everything, that we're optimizing for that. We only charge on net dollars that clients keep. So when you have the best performing solution in the market, you can do things like that, like saying, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And if you switch to me, you're only going to pay if it actually generates significant revenue for you. And fortunately, so far, that's been the case for 100% of our customers.
You mentioned that that the average subscription commerce company takes basically 4 months to recover the cost of acquiring the customer. I mean, this obviously makes the case for doing whatever is necessary to save these false declines or false positives or failed payments, a business imperative for these players.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is a metric that especially SaaS businesses track, is what's my payback period on marketing and sales and marketing dollars. And, the industry standard, it could be 4 months, it could be 7 months, it could be, in the cases of some startups, 12 months if they're really growing aggressively and spending a lot on marketing. What's interesting about the recovering failed payments is that the payback period on those efforts is instantaneous. If you roll out a better solution to recover and retain the customers you already have, that's net new dollars straight to the bottom line and the top line that you can redeploy into growing the business today without waiting for that payback period on your marketing, which is why it boggles my mind. What we find is that the more sophisticated, the larger the merchant, the more they're aware of the importance of this. Every business can benefit from optimization and efficiency. Clearly, the larger organizations have dedicated teams that focus specifically on how can we be more optimized, be more efficient, increase our lifetime value. I'd love to see more earlier stage and mid-market customers really taking advantage, because ultimately they're competing with these larger organizations that are highly efficient. The earlier on in their own life cycle that they can manage to be efficient and optimized, the better off they're going to be in their ability to market, to improve their product, give better customer service, all these things. It improves just about every unit economic in the business across the board.
What is another use case for applying your predictive analytics to the business? I mean, you're able to anticipate something that is, or you're able to identify something that is fraud or not. You're also able to remedy NSF and other causes of failed payments. But what are some of the other use cases for your model in thinking about predictive behaviors?
Yeah, it's a great question. We do have a lot of data, and we're very, very passionate about about our clients and helping them to optimize their businesses, leveraging the data that we have. Certainly, we've been able to help them identify which cohorts of the economy are the best performers for them within their own business, providing significant additional insights on where the broader economy, maybe outside of their own purview, is moving to help them to kind of optimize their future efforts of where they want to market. And it's great because the more data that we have access to, the better our models perform. That gives us more insight in how to present transactions. So we're trying to create incentives across the payment rails for everyone to participate and contribute data. Yes, they extract value out of that, but then we get to build this really significant data lake that can be used to, it's kind of like, my favorite analogy for this is like chocolate broccoli, right? Give them what they want while you give them what they need.
Chocolate broccoli?
Yeah.
That is an innovation. I'm not sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Give them what they want, but make sure what they
need.
All right, Dara. Well, this was interesting. I mean, it's it's a big problem. I mean, I didn't realize that so much of it was fraud, because they've already established a relationship with customers. So why would they think that it's fraudulent if it's transaction number 5?
That's a great question, and I wish that, not that I wish, but it's interesting if you would have asked that way. What happens is that a lot of the fraud indicators are based on what's just recently happened on the card. So the transaction was always deemed as maybe a little bit suspicious, but now the merchant's running into a little bit of trouble and their reputation is starting to degrade because maybe they got hit by a fraud ring. The card holder has recently had a problem with a suspicious looking transaction. There's all these other factors that come in that just elevate the risk profile of these transactions a little bit more and cause what was previously approving to now decline. It's crazy when you think of it. It blew my mind when I got to the opportunity to pull back the kimono and really look inside as to what's going on inside of these systems. But yes, generally speaking, the longer a customer has been with a merchant, the higher the likelihood that transaction will continue to approve over time. But we still see like customers that are in month 13 of their life cycle, and all of a sudden they randomly decline on month 14. It's bizarre.
And it's bizarre because of other circumstances that may have nothing to do with the cardholder, but with the merchant.
Exactly. It has nothing to do with this relationship between this cardholder and this merchant. It's other external factors, other things going on within the merchant, other things going on within the issuer, other things going on with the cardholder and other merchants they've transacted with. Everything's kind of connected together, woven together into this complex system that's, I would say, almost too complex, but that's the problem. Like the fraudsters are getting more and more complex. So we layer in more and more complex tools, but then it just leaves opportunities for stuff to get stuck between the cracks, dropping between the cracks, and then you get what we've got today.
Is there a particular size of transaction where this is more predominant than others?
Price point is definitely one of the factors that weighs on risk, and that depends on the issuer. Some issuers are like, look, I'm going to be willing to look the other way if it's under $10. Mm-hmm. But if it's over $2,000, and of course it's a spectrum in between the two, but we don't see that across the board with all issuers. And that's, again, part of the problem that it would have been nice to touch on, is that these decisions on what to approve or decline are made at the issuer level, of which there are 6,000 in America. These are 6,000 stakeholders independently making decisions on what they're going to approve or decline. That's a recipe for chaos, which is another one of the drivers and why we see what we do today.
Thank you so much for the time today and for letting us understand better your platform and how you help subscription commerce merchants be more successful.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure to be here and chat with you. Thanks again.
Thank you.